I want to start off talking about Joe Mixon and the rumor that has flown around before, but it flew around again last night. Casey, go ahead, throw the tweet up there. Matt Berry from ESPN said that at the Combine, he heard that the Bengals were not going to re-sign Tyler Boyd, no surprise there, and that they are likely to release Joe Mixon, which, depending on what side of Cincinnati Bengals Twitter fandom you are on, can come as a bit of a surprise. He's due $8 million. If they have him on the roster on March 17th, he will get a $3 million roster bonus. And here's my take on the whole situation. Obviously, if you're a part of Bengals Twitter, you know that two of the titans of Bengals Twitter, Joe Goodberry, Zim Hude, who Zim's been on this show before, they had a big beef about Joe Mixon. For whatever reason, Joe Mixon is a very divisive, I should say, feature on the Cincinnati Bengals. And a lot of it comes with just the running back position in its entirety. Obviously, Joe Mixon has he came into the Bengals with some baggage, but for better or worse, has been a pillar and has been a fantastic Cincinnati Bengal over his run. But the problem is he plays a position that, if you know me, if you know my take on the whole thing, doesn't come with a lot of value. Teams in the NFL, the National Football League, don't value the running back position as much as they did 10 years ago, as much as they did 15 years, heck, even as much as they did 5 years ago when Joe Mixon first came into the league. But here's the thing. Last year, Joe Mixon was handed off the ball 250 times. He rushed for 1,034 yards. He caught 52 passes, second most in his career. He had about 350 yards, receiving yards. He scored 12 total touchdowns, which once again was second most in his career. So you might be thinking, Reed, he had 1,400 yards. He had the second most touchdowns of his career. Why wouldn't you want to bring him back? But here's the thing. And Casey will have this tweet. This is from Joe Goodberry, who is a very knowledgeable. He said, in NFL history, 453 running backs have seen 300-plus touches in a single season. Only 90 of them didn't accumulate for 1,400 yards. That's 80% of them, if they get 300 touches. So the baseline expectation when you give a running back the ball 300 times is that they get 1,400 yards. And that's exactly what Joe Mixon did. He broke the minimum. And I get it. The line wasn't great. Obviously, we were going to run the ball a lot more in the second half of the year because Joe Burrow was hurt. But when this conversation about what you do with Joe Mixon, right? Because it is a divisive thing. Do you go and draft a guy? Do you go and get a cheap free agent to replace Joe Mixon? And they go, well, if you get a cheap free agent, you're only saving a few $1 million and production's going to go down. And it's the age-old argument of what you have versus what you can get. The unknown quantity versus the known quantity. And you know what Joe Mixon is. In fact, his stats pretty much baseline for the majority of his career. He's going to get about 4 yards a carry. If you give it to him 200-plus times, he's going to get about 1,000 yards. He can do some things out of the backfield receiving-wise, but he's not exceptional at it. But he certainly has that part. He's not a great pass blocker. Though I think there has been a conscious effort on his behalf to get better at it. But the whole unknown quantity versus known quantity doesn't really work at the running back position. People think when guys like myself say that you can replace the quote that I had, and I think it's an ill-fated quote, was they're a dime a dozen. That's a bit ill-fated, but it's not coming out of left field. We've seen it time and time again in the NFL. There's this superstar running back. And you think you have something that nobody else in the NFL has. He wants to get paid like he is a superstar. And then team's like, I don't know. Let him go. Another team says, yeah, you can come on in. And it doesn't work out. Le'Veon Bell, Dalvin Cook, Jonathan Taylor for the Colts this past year. time and time again, we are seeing that position be easily replaced. I mentioned Jonathan Taylor. Zach Moss was pretty good for the Colts this year. Go ahead and look at the top 10 running backs in the NFL. And the reason I bring this up is because look at how they value the position in the draft, right? The top 10 picks, and I know there are some, every once in a while, Saquon Barkley, Swift last year. But who are the top 10 picks in the draft every year? Quarterbacks, tackles, pass rushers, wide receivers. Maybe a cornerback mixed in there. Look at the first round picks. Very rarely do you see a running back taken in the first round. It's because they know if you draft later, you can take a guy in the third, fourth round, second rounds. Even later than that, Kyron Williams was a fifth round pick. Isaiah Pacheco was a seventh round pick. They know that you can get production out of almost anyone if you have a good line. And like I said, go look at the top 10 rushers this past year. Only 2 of them were first-round picks. Only a couple of them are making big money. What the Bengals need to do, and I've said this for years, every 3 years you draft a running back in the middle rounds. You have the veteran, you replace him with a young guy. They have Chase Brown that took more carries last year towards the second half. You get a power back in the middle rounds, and this is a good draft to do it. There isn't a single running back that likely will be taken in the first round, and really guys like Blake Corum, who carried Michigan, Audric Esime, who carried Notre Dame, are going to be taken in the late third, early fourth round. It just seems too easy. So that's what I think the Bengals should do with Joe Mixon. I think this is a no-brainer. Casey, what happened in the world of sports yesterday?
Am I allowed to comment on any
Sure.
So I disagree in the idea of cutting Joe Mixon to just then replace him with someone else, because if it only makes sense, right, if it's a league minimum running back, right?
So guy in draft.
That only makes sense if it's a guy in the draft. People are wanting to replace him, though, with guys like A.J. Dillon, who's probably going to get like $5 million anyways in the open market. Maybe less than that, maybe like $3 million. But again, Joe Mixon is already accounting for $3 million of your cap space once you cut him. So really, you're paying $6 million at the running back position. I don't know. To me, the drop off, right? That unknown is there's not a drop off. There really isn't. There's a slight one, but it's a jump off the stage here, not a jump off the cliff, not a jump off Mount Everest. True. I understand that. I understand the idea that it's not a giant jump off, but you're also forgetting the other stuff that we can't see. I'm going to be Elliott here for a second. The leadership, the intangibles there. He's been there since day one. They love him in the locker room. I mean, they kept him around for this long. There's a reason why. To me, it only makes sense if you get a guy in the draft. And that scares me because Chase Brown, he had a good rookie season. But his second half,
it was okay.
His knock was he dropped the ball a lot, fumbled it quite a bit. Joe Mixon has been one of the most efficient running backs in the NFL at protecting the football. Yep. He's only fumbled like 6 times his entire career. That's astounding. And he's been very efficient in the pass game. He's been a top 10 pass catcher out of the backfield. And, I'm not sure if I'm ready to take that risk in maybe not finding the guy in the draft that you want. Because that's the thing is you're going to force yourself to look at the running back position like you're going to want to make that a priority. You're going to want to make that a priority to get in maybe a round earlier. And it kind of goes against your argument that you can just get him whenever. Well, the Bengals, they're going to have a massive hole there if it's just Chase Brown. So they're going to want to get a guy early. So that's the cap.
Round, I mean, that's where like if you look at the big board, there's likely going to be a guy. Apologize, I don't know the names. I actually have it listed right in front of me. You're looking at Jonathan Brooks is going to be likely taken second round, early third. Trey Benson, Florida State. is going to be taken in the third. Blake Corum, Audric Estime, Bucky Irving, all these guys are going to be taken in the fourth, right? So, yeah, you have to make it a priority. But then you can use that money, the money that you're saving, to replace what you were going to draft in that position anyways. A guy like we were looking for some help in the secondary, right? Now you can use that money to replace where a bunch of safeties just became available. There's a big safety. It's a buyer's market to where now you can put a little more money into getting a veteran safety, a big-time veteran safety. Now you can pour a little bit more money into the interior defensive line, which is an important position. And I guess I just insinuated that running back isn't an important position, but I guess that's where I'm getting at. I guess that's what I'm getting at. Guys, ask yourself this simple question. I've brought it up on this show before. When have you ever looked at a team and said the following sentence? They are a running back away from being true contenders. It has never came into my mind. I've thought that about a quarterback. I've thought that about a lineman. I've thought that about an edge rusher. I've thought that against a wide receiver. I've never thought that against the running back. And the reason that you don't have that thought is because most good teams have a good running back. And that's because most running backs are made by their good line. And I get Joe Mixon had a bad line this entire time. He's rushing for 1,000 yards. I get that. I understand that. But it's so throughout the history of the NFL, or at least the last 20 years, every team, almost all of them, that are perennial contenders, get a new guy every couple years. How many big-name running backs did the Patriots dynasty have? And I know you're going to look at me and say, how can you compare what the Bengals are trying to do to what the Patriots have done? And I would say, why can't you mold? Kind of after that. Look at what the Kansas City Chiefs are doing. They made a mistake. They'll admit that they made a mistake. Drafting Clyde Edwards-Helaire. First-round running back. They get a guy in the 7th round next year that they like more. And I saw Everett Henry say, he's the exception, not the rule in terms of Isaiah Pacheco. That's fair. But is it? Kyron Williams drafted in the 5th round. All I'm saying is, guys, it is a position that I'm not overly worried about. Out of all of the holes that the Bengals have to fill, if they decide to release Joe Mixon, guess what's in the back of my mind? It's running back. It's not who's going to be the second wide receiver or the third wide receiver if Tyler Boyd's gone. Replacing Jonah Williams is way more important than replacing Joe Mixon. If DJ Reader walks out the door, that position's way more important than replacing Joe Mixon. Getting veteran help. I like our secondary. I like the youth. Cam Taylor-Britt, DJ Turner, Jordan Battle, Dax Hill. I like those guys. I think getting a veteran piece out there is more important than replacing Joe Mixon. Heck, one position that I don't talk about hardly ever because I think it's closer to a running back position than it is a wide receiver, and that's tight end. Because I've seen the same production regardless of who we throw in there. CJ Uzomah, Hayden Hurst, Tanner Hudson, the D2 quarterback, had the best tight end year in the last 3. I'm more concerned about that than I am about running back. And I get the arguments that if you replace him with a free agent running back, you're not really saving any money. So why don't you just have the guy that's been around that everyone likes, right? That showed a little bit of juice, showed had some horsepower in that engine. We're talking about getting younger at running back. I don't want to get older there. I don't want to continue down this road. And to be honest with you, I'm tired of the argument. I'm tired of it. I'm tired of talking about Joe Mixon all the time. And if he's here for another year, we're going to bring it up. His contract's done next year, correct?
Yeah.
And we will talk about, should we bring back Joe Mixon again? Feels toxic at this point. Casey?
Yeah, the only reason I wanted to point that out is mainly because I wanted to get your thoughts on, yes, that is what the Bengals should do. I agree 100% with you. Get a guy in day 3 at the running back position. There's going to be lots of those guys available that you'd feel comfortable with, at least for a year, and then you see what you got. Will the Bengals be willing to take the gamble of going into the draft with a hole at that position? I don't think they will. They're going to look at that roster and say, we cannot risk there being a hole at the running back position. We got to go find a guy in free agency. And at that point, that would be a mistake, in my opinion. I think that they should be willing to take the gamble. That's really what it boils down to. I don't think that they will take the gamble.
So
that's the crux of the problem.
It's the same thing that we talk about with the trade deadline every year. It's
Right.
like we want them to go get something. We know they won't.
Correct.
It's the same thing we're talking about T. Higgins. We want them to trade T. Higgins. We think that's better for the team, and more about that. Everyone talks about salary cap stuff, salary cap issues. It's not a real hit. Look at what the Buffalo Bills did yesterday, and tell me that the salary cap isn't an issue. But it's more of what the Bengals actually will do as opposed to what we want them to do. And I'm on board that they should take the gamble because I don't think it's a gamble at all.
Right.
I really don't think
I
it's
think
that
we
big
both
of
agree with
a
that.
problem at all.
I think we both agree with that. I just don't know if they take that risk, to be honest with you. They're too safe. They say they're all in, but they're really not all in, if you ask me. They're all in their building and their philosophy standpoint, but they're not going to break their philosophy. They're not going to go against the grain and leave a position going into the draft wide open.